Garen and a Dragon Named Goose Chapter 6. No, Garen, you're not going to Sam's, and that's final. Garen slumped in the kitchen chair. His dad's face was bright red, and he'd even stopped eating his dinner. That's when you knew he was really angry. Arden was smiling with a look that screamed, "Told you so. Griffin, don't you think you're being too harsh?" Hope, in the form of his mother's voice. Ayla, head teacher Cleason, and the bloody council, mind you, were very clear that Garen should stay at home, that it might not be safe for him to venture out alone until more military. Then sent Arden with him. We're talking half a mile down the road to the center, Griffin, not all the way to Baytown. Arden groaned. Why not Zephyr? I really need to focus on my preparations for the festival and my studies. Zephyr laughed, grandly stretching out her arms. Why? Because you are the great Arden, hope of all of Aria, strongest sky ever to live. Arden scowled at Zephyr, who in reply stuck out her tongue. Garen's father had his head in his hands. As sure as the power of balance between Callie and Hank weighed in Callie's favor, in this house, his mother's word always had the sway. His father cleared his throat and tried to regain his composure. Arden, go with Garen and make sure they don't get into any trouble. The statement left no room for rebuttal. Arden shot a look at Garen that could kill, and Garen feared that any plan Sam was concocting was now likely dead. I knew he'd come, Sam said, his big mouth smiling as wide as ever, his frantic gestures even more animated than usual. They walked along the cart, warm road to Ashbridge, with Arden trudging along behind, puffing and sighing all too loudly. He was dressed in his full and very green Mydor University garb, robes and all, various badges of achievement displayed on the high collar. He never missed a chance to show off, even if it was making his brow drip with sweat under his oiled hair. In contrast, Garen and Sam wore thin woolen tunics, shorts and sandals, all white, as Sam had requested. Sam's looked baggy on his small frame. Garen frowned. You knew, but what are we going to do about it? You'll see, just leave it to me, Sam said with a wink. Sam still hadn't told Garen the plan. Apparently, it was safer that way. Tainu, sitting on Sam's shoulder and holding on to Sam's spiky hair, tried to copy Sam's wink, but just blinked both of his eyes a few times. Horn, said Goose for the 50th time, his head lolling out the back of Garen's backpack. Garen's father had insisted the dragon stay in the bag as much as possible, and for the most part, Goose seemed happy to oblige. Even small birds were making him duck back inside. Perhaps Garen had Ori to thank for that. The path eventually widened and became more densely cobbled, some of the stones scattered within them beginning to glow with soft orange light. At a cross-section, marked by the tallest fire tree in town, Garen had never dared climb to the top, perhaps 5 or 6 stories high. They turned left and onto Ashbridge Road. The town centre stretched 100 paces down each side of the widening path. The first 50 were small terraced houses of slate and stone, some with thatched roofs, some wooden, some with smoke rising from small chimneys, others with a warm glow of light in oddly shaped windows. Flowers of different colours and designs dotted the terraces, seeming to blend the uneven roofs and styles together. Along each side of the road, steam rose from vents rushing with volcanic water. Past the houses, the road opened into a square, surrounded with taller buildings, an obsidian black fountain of a leaping fish at its center. They walked down past the houses, Arden faking a yawn as he tried to see who took notice of him. Garen hoped very much that no one did. It was a miracle that they hadn't bumped into anyone from school yet. They came to a stop at the fountain at the square's center, and sat down on the warm obsidian rim. A few small children came up to stare at Tanu, who masterfully dodged their playful pokes, until Sam made him stay still as they petted him. Thankfully, the only sound to come from Garen's backpack was the rumbling sound of Goose's snoring. Around the square stood the larger, more important buildings. The Healer's, a large and glowing green leaf above its door. The butcher next to it, offering the finest meats from whatever they caught in the forests around Mount Aria, or sometimes imported from the docks. Then there was the commune, a small, square-looking building, plain slate and wood on the face of it, but its slanted roof was peppered with small holes for carrier pigeons and birds, the cheapest form of messaging in area. In front of its pillared entrance arch, much too big for a building so small, stood a green post of spirit stone. It was there Arden went first, drawing his slate like a sword before tapping it against the green stone. The stone received messages from the main beacon in Baytown, allowing those with slates or other devices to receive any long-distance messages or news. Arden, being a university student, didn't need to worry about paying for the privilege. Past the commune sprawled an open market of ever-changing carts and stalls of all varieties, most of them run by the spiritless, although Garen could see one merchant with a small monkey spirit animal. Their wares ranged from fish caught down at Garen Bay to strange-looking runes and artifacts from the Bloodlands. Some even sold spirit energy storage devices and potions. There were definitely more carts than usual, and some even floated. Garen had never seen those in Ashbridge before. The price tags dangling from those ranged into the thousands of ambies, a price Garen couldn't even imagine. On the opposite side of the square stood the Crestfall Inn, the largest building by far, perhaps 4 or 5 houses wide and 3 stories tall. It had smooth white walls, so smooth it had to be spirit masonry at work, with thick wooden beams layered across at each floor. In the ash-colored thatch roof sat 3 fat chimneys that looked more like wells, steam billowing from them in soft clouds. Laughter spilled from its main barn, like doors mixing with harp and flute. Stretching into the square were tables of people eating, talking and laughing, but there were no spirit animals among them. The inn had a strict policy, and unless you could keep them in spirit form or reduce them down to pocket size, you couldn't take them in. "There's an awful lot more people than usual, Sam. I'm not sure this is a good idea," Garen said. Usually in Ashbridge, everyone knew everyone. It just wasn't that big, but today was different. Of all the filled seats outside the inn, Garen could only spot a few people he knew. Not all were dressed in typical Aryan colors of yellow, blue or white, and some were far paler than the tanned, weathered faces of Aryans. Sam smiled. "It's your fault, you know. Lots of traders have been getting rejected from Baytown's docks because of the level 4 thing. So instead, they're sneaking in through Garen Bay down here whilst they can. Mum says they'll likely be here until the festival, when they'll go into Baytown to make the real ambies." Garen nodded. "His fault. What would everyone be thinking of him?" The floor seemed to be the only place left to look. "It's a good thing, Garen. More out-of-towners means less people to recognize you." He gave a look at Arden and twitched his big nose as if smelling something foul or that oath. Sam came a call from the inn. On a second-story window, Maya leaned out, waving over a sill of purple flowers. "I'll be right down." When Maya approached, it wasn't to Garen or Sam she spoke, but Arden. She pulled aside her hair from her face and batted her eyelids. The soft, tan colors of her skin and freckles seemed to match the yellow dress, spotted with small red flowers, perfectly. "Good evening to you, Arden," she said, her tone very formal. Arden looked down at her over the top of his slate. "Mayor Crestfall, a pleasure as always. Don't mind me." He took a few serious glances around, putting his device away. "I'm just here for protection." Maya shot a quick glance to Garen and Sam, and then shook her head. "I just meant to tell you, in the inn are several Mydorian soldiers, high-ranking at that, judging by the badges along their collars." Arden's face changed instantly, and he bent down to stare Maya straight in the face. "Mydorian soldiers, you're certain?" He straightened his robes and smoothed over his hair, his eyes wider than Garen had seen all summer. "Mother says she'll introduce you if you hurry on in." Arden placed a hand on Maya's shoulder and gave a curt nod. "Thank you, Maya. Garen, I trust you'll be at Sam's." Garen nodded. "Then please excuse me, gentlemen. Miss Crestfall after you." Garen watched as they went, and then turned to Sam. "This is all part of the plan," Sam laughed, slapping Garen on the back. "Told you to trust me, didn't I?" Sam looked toward the inn. Any second now and Maya will be back out again. Garen looked over to the window Maya had been in. Bambo was still there, watering the flowers with a miniature green watering can. It had to be Maya's room. He'd played in the inn with her but never been up there. It probably smelled like her in there, flowery, everything neatly laid out with. "Maybe Bambo will drop down a rope for you," Sam said, waving his hand in front of Garen's face. Before he could answer, Maya came bounding out of the inn. "Okay," she said as she came closer. "That should be Arden taken care of. He's so starstruck he'll be shining their boots for them soon." "Excellent," Sam said, rubbing his hands together. "Garen, let's go." "Maya, are you not coming?" Garen asked. If Sam had been drinking, he would have spat it all out. Such was the sound he made. Maya just blushed furiously, and then stormed back to the inn. Sam, seeing Garen's face, cut his laughing short, and cleared his throat. "We're going to the hot spring, Garen. Behind the main pools are some abandoned ones no one uses anymore. The old chi pools, as they call them." Garen and a dragon named Goose, Chapter 6, Part 2. "I've heard there's no place better to rejuvenate spirit levels." Sam's words dawned on Garen. What he had just asked Maya, and as is custom for you Aryans, Sam continued, his smile slowly growing. "We will bathe naked." Garen groaned. "I wish you'd have told me sooner, Sam. You're as useless at keeping secrets as you're hiding your feelings from Maya, Garen. It was the only way. Now come on, let's get a move on before your sleeping dragon wakes up." "But wait a second, how are we going to get in? Don't they have to pay?" Garen asked, trying to force his thoughts in a different direction. "We sneak in the back. No one bothers about those pools anymore. And even if they find us," he tugged at his baggy white tunic, "we look like we work there." Garen sighed. It was too late to back out now or save his pride. More than that, he needed the energy. "All right, let's go, between the market carts and the inn." They walked, passing the busy stables, granary and other outbuildings. The Ashbridge hot springs were on the first rolling slopes of Mount Area, overlooking the town. Tom's house was up there somewhere too, Garen remembered, although he'd never actually been. Come to think of it, he hadn't seen Tom at all since getting Goose. "Sam, did you invite Tom today?" Garen asked. "You mean Lord Ashbridge himself?" Sam scoffed. "Ever since you got Goose, he has been obsessed with training Garen. I haven't seen him at all." "No one has." Maya only heard about it in the inn. Tom and Garen had been close friends since even before Sam had arrived in Area. Tom's father, a decorated military hero, had always demanded the most of his son, and Tom had always delivered. They crossed the large bridge over the River Cairn, a black and polished structure made completely from volcanic rock and hardened with spirit energy. The guardrail along its edge was shaped like a rolling wave, glowstones of white at each crest. The tiles of the deck were a swarm of fish heading to the other side. It was quite the sight, and the town's namesake. In a few days, it would be full of travelers heading to Baytown for the festival, and lined with candlelit lanterns. For now, though, it was quiet. After the bridge, it was only a short hike up the mountain path to the Caldera hot springs. As the place emerged from between the trees, it was clear it had seen better days. Its large firewood structure, held up by thick trunks on the steep mountainside, was faded and worn, the stairs creaking as they climbed up to the main deck. Lanterns hanging from the main entrance had slight tears, shadows of bugs crawling around inside of them. Sam pulled Garen away and down a side path that bordered the high firewood fence perimeter. Up the narrowing path they went, hiking up small boardwalks between the dense trees and overgrown weeds. Eventually, they came to a large gate in the fence, a thick chain lying on the ground before it. A sign on the gate simply read, "Stay out. Looks like someone else came first," Garen said, picking up the heavy chain and casting a worried look at Sam. Sam shrugged. "Like I said, people sneak in here all the time. No one cares." He heaved the gate open and walked in. Garen waited a moment, looking back down the path to make sure no one was watching, and then quickly hopped through, shutting the gate behind him. The heat hit Garen first. It was so moist and hot that it felt like walking into a different world, as if the fence and overhanging trees were trapping it all in. They were standing on a small and creaky wood deck, large and dusty wicker boxes on shelves to the deck side, and a small veranda overhead. To the right and down the hill, the view was obscured by thick foliage and palm tree, dripping with moisture, but the odd voice of bathing guests still reached them. Left up the sloping hill were 4 round pools, each a level higher than the other, a wooden plank way snaking up between them. Large boulders and rocks covered in moss poked out around their edges, some perilously so. From each body of water came a bright glow, lighting the area against the growing darkness of the night. At the end of the deck on which they stood was yet another sign. "Danger, stay out, just trying to stop people from bathing for free, that's all," Sam said as he pulled out a dusty basket and threw his shirt in. Garen put down his backpack gently and untied the flap. Goose was still snoring, curled up with his tail around his head. Tanu walked over, smiled at Garen, and then slapped the sleeping dragon around his face. With a start, Goose woke up and tumbled out of the bag, head over tail. He then shot up and ran over to Garen, putting Garen's legs between him and Tanu. Tanu just gave a cheeky little wave. "Come on then," said Sam as he finished changing. "We'd best be quick." Garen threw off his clothes into a basket, picked up Goose and followed, skipping over parts of the deck where weeds and nettles had grown through. They climbed up and passed the first couple of pools, the heat only increasing as they carefully stepped through. "Let's go to the big one at the back," Sam said, smiling and pointing ahead. The 4th and final pool at the top was as wide as all the others put together, with a tinge of yellow to its glow. Strange white flowers, their petals as big as his hand, grew all around its edge, some even bursting through the rocks. They looked familiar, but Garen couldn't quite put a finger on why. "You ready?" Sam said as they reached the top. "I don't know, Sam. Something feels off." These flowers and that strange glow. Garen looked behind. Goose was waiting 1 level down and didn't seem to want to come much closer. "It smells a bit odd too," Garen added. "A bit like bad eggs. Everything must smell like eggs to a sky, Garen." Sam laughed. "Come on. It's just the spirit energy. It'll feel great once we're..." Suddenly, something big and white swooped down between them, almost making Garen fall. For a second, Garen thought it was Hank, but the speed was on another level. Past Goose it flashed, down to the base of the slope, landing on an outstretched arm. "Tom!" Sam called, waving. "You idiots!" Tom called as he started running up to them, his large white eagle moving to his shoulder. His hair, such a light shade of blonde, it was almost white, was slick with sweat, the long strands dripping down past his grey eyes. "Get away from that pool." Goose had run up to be by Garen's legs, and had his ears pinned back at the sudden intrusion. Tom was panting for breath as he reached them, using his hands to go up the last few steps to their level. "Fortis saw you," he gasped, his wide chest heaving, "so I came as fast as I could, knowing what he might be doing." He pointed to the flowers as he took deep breaths. "It's a mana pool, you morons." "If you go in, you'll die. With speriums," Garen said, a cold shiver coming over him. "They only grow in areas of high mana." Tom simply nodded, saving his breath. "Wisperiums, huh," Sam said, kneeling down to peer at one. "Well, you learn something new every day." He stood up, nervously chuckling, and took a few steps back from the pool. Fortis, Tom's eagle, came down from his perch on Tom's shoulder and hopped over to Goose. His sharp, golden eyes regarded the dragon closely, and Goose dropped his head, and then the eagle squawked. "Hung!" screamed Goose, jumping backwards from Garen's legs. Garen turned, reaching down to grab Goose, but it was too late. "Goose!" he called, watching as his dragon fell, flailing his wings madly. With a splash, he fell into the glowing pool and disappeared under its shimmering surface. After a moment, his head bobbed back up, the dragon struggling to keep his head above water. "Hung! Hung! Hung! Let me go!" Garen cried as Tom and Sam held him back, but they wouldn't let go, couldn't. Garen watched, tears falling down his face as Goose's head disappeared under again, and this time he didn't come back. A deep, burning pain erupted at Garen's center. "We have to get away from the pool, Sam," Tom shouted, propping up Garen between them. Sam and Tom carried him down the narrow path to the deck below. Garen tried to make them turn back, but he had no energy and the pain was only building. It felt like his insides were being ripped apart. They reached the lower deck and sat Garen down. "Hong Wong." Garen's heart leapt as he saw Goose tumbling down the path from the top pool. As if forgetting he couldn't fly, he spread his wings and flapped uselessly, sending himself tumbling once more. With a crash, he rolled to a stop on the deck before them. This close, they could see he was glowing a yellow tint to his usual black, and the warmth radiating from him made the rest of the spring seem cool. Only his back moved in time with his quick, rasping breaths. "Garen, don't get too close," Tom warned as Garen took a step toward the dragon. The pain was still there in Garen's stomach, but fading. Suddenly, Goose's body heaved. Scales along his back split, spikes pushing through along his spine. The horns on his head reared back and grew sharp. He lunged heavily forward, muscles rippling along his swelling legs, as if spreading the burgeoning muscles and plates of scales on his chest also thickened, glowing red between the gaps. The dragon then reared up, unfurling giant wings of ripping flesh. In only moments, the beast towered over them, nearly half the size he'd been in the school hall, and, without realizing, the boys had backed up into the fence. There was nowhere left to go. "Goose!" Garen called, but there was no warmth or recognition in the narrow slits of the dragon's eyes. Only a murderous growl came from his belly in reply. With it, a red glow sparked under his scales there, rising slowly up to his chest, and then his neck. The growl grew, rumbling the ground beneath. "Them! Garen! Is that what I think it is?" shrieked Sam, pointing at the red light. Tanu was covering his eyes with his paws. The light reached the dragon's mouth and his jaws fell open, displaying the rows upon rows of deadly teeth, saliva dripping between them. He heaved again, and the light rose to the back of his throat, a deadly heat swarming over the cowering boys. Fortis suddenly flew in front of them, spreading his wings as wide as he could. Goose roared and the red light came.